The Ghost Army of World War II. In the summer of 1944, a convoy of American tanks rolled toward the front lines in France. German scouts spotted them, radioed the position back, and the German command adjusted their entire defensive line to meet a serious armored threat. There was no armored threat. The tanks were rubber. A soldier could pick one up under one arm and walk off with it. This was the Ghost Army, officially the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, and for over 50 years the United States government would not admit it existed. Not because it failed, because it worked so well that nobody wanted to explain on the record exactly how badly the enemy had been fooled. The unit was activated in January 1944, and the recruitment process looked nothing like the rest of the Army. They were not looking for the biggest or the toughest men available. They wanted painters, art students, sound engineers, and advertising men, people who understood how to build a lie and make it convincing at a glance. A future fashion designer was in this unit, so was a young painter who would later help found an entire school of American art. There were illustrators who had drawn advertisements for major magazines, sound technicians who had worked on early radio broadcasts, and set designers who understood, better than most infantry officers ever would, exactly how far you can push an illusion before an audience stops believing it. The Army had, more or less by accident, assembled the most creative platoon in military history and told them to go win a war with it. About 1,100 men in total, split across 4 specialties, each responsible for one layer of the illusion. One group built and inflated fake tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces out of rubber, and then deliberately left them slightly, imperfectly camouflaged. Not hidden, just hidden enough that a German reconnaissance plane flying overhead would spot a suspicious shape poking out from under some netting and report back that they had found something real. A second group ran sound trucks fitted with enormous speakers, blasting pre-recorded engine noise, tank treads, and marching boots for miles in every direction. Enemy listening posts would hear an armored division rumbling through the countryside at 2 in the morning. There was no armored division. There was a truck and a record player. A third group faked radio traffic entirely, impersonating the communication patterns of real divisions so convincingly that German intelligence built actual battle plans around units that had never left their barracks hundreds of miles away. And then there was the fourth trick, the one that required actual nerve rather than props. Soldiers would put on the shoulder patches of a real, much larger division, drive into a French town, and simply be seen. They would sit in cafes. They would strike up friendly conversations with locals. They would let it slip, casually, that a massive American force had just rolled into the area. If a German spy happened to be anywhere nearby, and there very often was one, the story would travel exactly where the Ghost Army wanted it to go, carried by someone who had no idea they were the messenger for a lie. With roughly 1,100 men and a truckload of rubber, this unit could convincingly impersonate a force of 30,000. 2 entire divisions, conjured out of inflatable props, borrowed speakers, and sheer confidence. They pulled this off more than 20 separate times between the Normandy landings and the crossing into Germany. And it worked because the men treated every operation like a full theatrical production, not a paperwork exercise. Before each deception, they needed a complete script. Which real division were they pretending to be this time? What did that division's radio operators actually sound like on the air? What would its soldiers plausibly complain about over a drink in a French cafe? If the illusion cracked on a single detail, the whole operation was exposed. And given how close to the actual front lines they often operated, sometimes within a mile or 2 of real German positions, exposure was never just a paperwork problem. Their single largest deception came near the very end of the war, along the Rhine River, where they impersonated 2 entire real divisions preparing to cross into Germany. The genuine divisions moved elsewhere, quietly, at night. The Ghost Army stayed behind and became them, loudly, for days on end, drawing German attention and artillery fire toward an empty stretch of riverbank while the real crossing happened somewhere else entirely. Historians estimate this unit's work across the war saved somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. Soldiers who would otherwise have walked directly into positions the Germans had specifically reinforced to meet a threat that did not exist. That final Rhine operation had a name, Operation Viersen, and it is worth sitting with the mechanics of it for a moment, because the scale is genuinely absurd. Over several nights, the unit ran more than 1,000 individual radio transmissions, moved sound trucks along the riverbank on a careful rotation so the noise never sat in one place too long, and inflated enough fake armor and vehicles to convince German observers that 2 full divisions were massing for a crossing. The real crossing, when it came, met far lighter resistance than expected. because a significant portion of the German defense had spent days quietly repositioning itself to face a rubber army several kilometers downriver. The risk in all of this was never abstract. These were not actors performing safely behind the lines. The unit routinely worked within a mile or two of actual German positions, close enough that a captured soldier or a single sloppy detail could have ended in something far worse than an awkward debrief. On at least one occasion, German artillery found the general area of a sonic deception and opened fire on it directly, on the theory that something real had to be making that much noise. The men running the operation had to sit through the shelling without breaking cover, because abandoning a fake position under fire would have told the enemy instantly that it had never been a real position at all. None of this was public for a very long time. The Army classified the entire operation, and it stayed that way until 1996. For over 50 years, the men who pulled off one of the most successful deception campaigns in military history could not tell their own families what they had actually done in the war. Some of them simply said they had served in a camouflage unit and left it at that, an answer that was technically true and almost entirely useless. It was not until historians and documentary filmmakers started digging decades later that the full scale of what these soldiers had pulled off finally became public knowledge. In 2022, the surviving members of the Ghost Army were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest honors the United States can give. Most of the men who had built the illusion were, by then, in their late 90s. A few had not lived long enough to receive it at all. There is something quietly satisfying about the shape of this story. An army built around brute force spent a year of its hardest fighting relying on a unit that almost never fired a shot in offense, made up almost entirely of artists, whose primary weapon was convincing an enemy general to believe something that was not true. The tanks were rubber. The armies were empty. The fear they created in the enemy's command structure was completely real, and it saved real lives on the other side of that fear. That is the entire trick behind deception, and it is why the Ghost Army worked as well as it did for as long as it did. You do not actually have to be strong. You only have to make the other side believe that fighting you would be a mistake. And that is the end of that tale. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe.